This story happened in rural Russia in the late 20th century. Fedor, who was 75 years old, worked as a combine harvester operator at one of the rural enterprises. He had been doing heavy work since early childhood. Fedor was thin, short in height, and his face had already become deeply wrinkled from a difficult life. Fedor had a wife and two sons named Nikolai and Mikhail, who also worked as tractor drivers in the fields. They were a very ordinary working-class family. Fedor could work for days on end to provide for his family, even though he had a small salary. But once a month, he was allocated a certain amount of potatoes, grains, and various vegetables. All of this was enough to feed the family. All the combine operators lived in a small building next to the fields. Each of them worked a full-day shift, after which they were replaced by another person. That morning, Fedor came to work in a bad mood. The cow he had been taking care of for 6 months had unexpectedly died. The old man hoped that the cow would give milk or give birth to calves, which would be even better. Fedor dreamed of his own small cow farm where he could calmly engage in cattle breeding and not suffer for days in a stuffy combine harvester. Fedor entered the house where the other combine operators were sitting and saw his comrades, who greeted him with concerned and downcast looks. From their faces, it was clear that they had not slept all night. In the room, besides everyone else, there was the head of the enterprise and the local police officer. "Lisha is missing," said the boss with a downcast look. "When did he go missing?" asked Fedor, puzzled. "He didn't return from his shift yesterday. We waited for him for 2 hours. Then we went to look for him. His combine harvester was standing in the middle of the field in the western part of our territory, where the cornfield starts. Lesha wasn't there, the local police officer said. Maybe he got drunk and went home. You're worrying for no reason," said Fedor. He wanted to calm them down, but was interrupted by the police officer. "I haven't told you everything yet. The door of the combine harvester was torn off and crushed like a piece of paper. No matter how much Lisha drank, he wouldn't have had enough strength to do that. Maybe a bear took him," suggested the boss of the enterprise. "We don't have any bears here. I've never seen a bear here in my entire life," said one of the combine harvester operators. "I also think it's a bear," said Fedor. "That wasn't a bear, I'm telling you. It was the Yeti," insisted the combine harvester operator, raising his voice. Fedor couldn't help but laugh out loud. He wasn't superstitious. He had heard stories about all kinds of spooky things since childhood and never believed in them. "Laugh as much as you want," said the combine harvester operator. "I believe that Lisha was taken by the Yeti." "I only believe what I see with my own eyes," replied Fedor in a harsh tone. After consulting, the combine harvester operators, together with the boss and the police officer, decided that some of them would go searching for Lisha while the others would carry out their work duties. They couldn't afford to have the combine harvesters idle. The enterprise had a work plan that needed to be fulfilled, or they would face huge fines. Among other things, they had to finish the work that was left after Lisha. When the boss of the enterprise asked the workers who would take on this task, there was silence in the room. Everyone was scared of the mysterious disappearance of the combine operator, and no one wanted to go to that part of the fields. Fedor, seeing how his comrades awkwardly lowered their gaze to the ground, volunteered himself. He fueled his combine with diesel and leisurely drove along the fields. His combine moved slowly along the gravel road that led to the western part. The sun was already high in the sky and was shining brightly. It was early autumn. This time of year, they usually harvest grain. Fedor opened the door of the combine to let in at least some cool air into the cabin. Otherwise, it was simply unbearable to be inside the driver's cab. The old man looked around and admired the beauty of nature. Snow-capped mountains could be seen in the distance over the sown plains. The sight of these mighty rocks made Fedor think about how short human life is. These rocks have been standing here for centuries, if not millennia, and during this time, many generations have passed. Hundreds of people looked at these mountains before him and felt the same way he does now. And after Fedor leaves this world, there will be those who will look at these mountains with the same admiration. On the way, he met a couple of farmers who were grazing flocks of sheep and cows. He involuntarily remembered his dream of having his own farm. The shepherds already knew about Lisha's mysterious disappearance and hurried to warn Fedor that it was possible that Yeti had taken him. Fedor didn't even bother listening to them and drove past. All these people know how to do is spread rumors and nonsense. The old man always looked down on people who can't think for themselves and didn't see the point in wasting his time on them. It's better to enjoy the silence and the views. While Fedor was lost in thought, he didn't notice a pile of chopped trees by the road. The combine's door slammed against the wooden beams with a loud bang and bent badly. The old man flinched and stopped to check if everything was okay with his vehicle. The thing door made of aluminum alloy shook badly. Fedor remembered his friends telling him about how the door of the combine on which Lisha worked was torn off. The old man assumed that something similar must have happened to him. Fedor managed to straighten the door so that it would at least lock. Sometimes combine operators left their working machines in the field overnight. Before doing so, they always had to lock the door so that no one could get into the cabin and steal the expensive combine. The old man finally arrived at the place where Lisha disappeared. The field was only half plowed, and he immediately got to work without wasting any time. Fedor had been working for several hours and had gone far into the field when the local police officer on horseback rode up to him. "Did you find him?" Fedor asked with a smile, confident that Lisha had already shown up. "No, we didn't find him," the officer replied and continued. "We didn't find Lisha, but we stumbled upon some tracks that lead into the forest. We'll continue the search there. I'll join you once I'm finished," offered Fedor. "We have enough people. You better finish up here and head home. Don't stay out too late." "Fedor, this is serious. The tracks we found are neither human nor bear. It's something else." Fedor didn't say anything. The officer mounted his horse and rode off into the distance, leaving the old man to continue his work alone. As the sun began to set and the first stars appeared in the sky, Fedor realized he wouldn't be able to finish his work in time. He pulled his combine harvester up to a cornfield and turned off the engine. He decided to have a light dinner before heading back. Fedor sat next to the cornfields and prepared his modest meal of mountain tea, homemade cheese, and black bread. The cool evening breeze swept across the entire field. To his surprise, the old man began to think about the possibility that some unknown creature might have abducted Lisha. After all, our world is vast, and its depth remain unknown. Lost in thought, Fedor finished his dinner and gathered his things, loading them into the cabin. He turned the ignition key, but the combine harvester wouldn't start. He tried again, pressing the clutch, but with no success. Fedor got out of the machine and checked the fuel. One of the tanks was still half full, so the problem must be something else. The old man decided to check the battery. It seemed to be in good shape, and the batteries were giving off power. Fedor was puzzled. All the mechanisms seemed to be working properly, but the combine harvester refused to start. Meanwhile, it was getting dark. Trying to fix the machine in the dark was pointless. So he decided to spend the night in the combine harvester's cabin and head to his destination tomorrow, or wait for someone to find him. The old man lay down in the cab, using his thick jacket as a mattress. "If I don't return by midnight, the guys will come looking for me," thought Fedor. "But how will they find me in the dark?" He decided to turn on the headlights so that he could be seen from a distance. Surprisingly, the combine's headlights worked. Fedor assumed it was a temporary malfunction of the system and tried to start the engine again. But the combine refused to start. So the old man left the headlights on and wrapped himself in his jacket to take a nap. The driver's cab was mostly made of glass, so everything happening around him could be seen through it. If the driver sat behind the wheel, a casual observer could only see his head and shoulders. Fedor lay down in the cab in such a way that, from the outside, it might have looked empty. Fedor quickly fell into a doze. He wasn't quite asleep, But he wasn't fully awake either. His warm jacket, lined with sheep's wool, quickly warmed him up. But the old man felt the cool gusts of wind blowing through small holes in the combine's body. The cornfield where Fedor settled periodically came to life. A light night breeze swept over the field and passed through the rows in waves. This sound lulled the old man to sleep. Chaotic thoughts raced through his head one after another. He thought about his sons and his wife. Then he dreamed a short dream where he was sitting on his own farm, smoking a pipe and herding cows. Suddenly, he remembered Lyasha and his mysterious disappearance. Fedor wanted to switch quickly to some other thought, but he couldn't. His heart started pounding hard for some reason. The sound of the cornfield became louder to him. No matter how much he tried to stay asleep, an inexplicable uneasiness and anxiety brought him back to his senses. Reluctantly, the old man opened his eyes and saw the Milky Way through the glass roof of the combine harvester. Fedor was not fully awake yet. The wind died down. For some reason, it became too quiet around him. The silent night was eerie. A person always feels calmer when the world produces its natural sounds. When silence falls, a person's hearing detects every extra rustle and listens carefully. Fedor heard the rustling of the cornfields and began to feel as if someone was walking beside him. Sometimes the old man thought about looking out of the cabin, but either he did not want to get up from the warm place, or he was afraid of seeing something. He still could not make up his mind to stand up. His thoughts went to Lisha, his mysterious disappearance, and stories about the Yeti. No matter how much Fedor tried to push these thoughts away, they penetrated his consciousness more and more strongly, sowing an irresistible and uncontrollable fear in his heart. Suddenly, unexpectedly for himself, Fedor heard the sound of footsteps distinctly. It seemed to him that someone had come out of the cornfield and was heading towards his combine harvester. At that very moment, the headlights went out. Apparently, the battery died. The one who came out of the forest walked on two legs, and one could assume that it was a person. But the old man realized from the sounds that it was something big. Every step of the uninvited guest sunk deeply into the ground. This someone was very heavy. Could it be a bear? Thought the old man. Fedor did not rush to reveal himself. The creature came up close to the cab of the combine harvester. Fedor quickly wrapped himself in his jacket and tied the only door in the cabin to the steering wheel with a belt. The thing that came out of the field breathed as if it were a bear and carefully sniffed at the door. Fedor became more convinced that it was a bear. The beast was circling around the combine, and each step made Fedor's heart beat even faster. He knew that if the bear attacked him, he wouldn't survive. Such a beast could easily tear his cabin apart and leave only his bones behind. So I was right, the combine driver thought to himself. A bear really did drag Fedor away. As soon as he thought about it, a familiar voice came from where the beast was walking. "Is anyone in the cabin? Igor, is that you? I'm freezing out here in the field. Let me warm up." Fedor recognized the voice. It was undoubtedly Lisha. The old man wanted to respond, but a sense of fear made him keep his tongue behind his teeth. His survival instinct didn't fail him. After a moment, another voice sounded. This voice was very strange and sounded like a crowd of people suffering from sore throat all spoke at once. Creature said, "Cold, cold. It's cold in the mountains. Warm down below, food down below." Fedor, hearing this hellish voice, was terrified and his body trembled. The old man didn't know what to think. Bears don't talk, that's for sure. And Lisha, no matter how tired he was, wandering around the fields, wouldn't sniff around his cabin and breathe like a wild beast. After a moment, the beast slowly approached the combine and leaned against it. Fedor's cabin bent heavily under its weight. The cabin door, which he had hit against a pile of felled trees during the day, almost fell off. It was held in place by a belt with which the old man had tied it to the steering wheel. Fedor didn't make a sound. He held his breath and tried to breathe as quietly as possible so that the beast wouldn't notice him. Thanks to his small proportions, the old man was able to completely cover himself with his jacket. Meanwhile, the unwanted guest was examining the combine cabin. If Fedor had been able to peek out from behind the cover and catch a glimpse of the Yeti out of the corner of his eye, he could have lost his mind, and soon after, his life. Dawn was approaching. In the villages nearby the fields, the first roosters crowed. Amazingly, as soon as the beast heard these sounds, it ran straight into the cornfield. The whole combine shook from the stomping of its feet. Things in Fedor's cabin fell off the shelves and onto the floor. Soon after, the morning sun rose, but the old man did not hurry to get up. He was still in terror. He thought the beast was hiding somewhere, waiting for Fedor to think the danger had passed and come out of the cabin. So he lay under his jacket until lunchtime. The sun was already at its peak when Fedor could clearly hear the voices of local farmers, cows mooing, and horses galloping. Gradually, the fear left the old man, and finally he cautiously pushed aside his jacket and looked outside. The beast was gone. The world had become safe for Fedor again. He returned to his comrades and learned from them that the search for Lisha had been unsuccessful. Fedor himself told them what had happened to him. Since then, all the combine drivers carried weapons and were ready for the unexpected appearance of the Yeti, but no one had encountered the beast since then.